After my wife passed away, we had the inheritance meeting. My daughter-in-law smiled coldly. Now, the day of the inheritance meeting, my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, sat across the polished mahogany table with a smirk that could cut glass. She told me that now that my wife was gone, my only responsibility was to sign the company over to her son and find a nice, quiet place to fade away. I just smiled, the way my Clara taught me to when facing a fool's gambit. What Vanessa didn't know was that inside my briefcase sat a single sheet of paper, a lab report that would not only deny her every penny she was after, but would also rewrite our entire family history. Before I tell you how that one document detonated a lifetime of lies, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and please like and subscribe if you believe that truth. No matter how long it's been buried, always finds the light. The silence in our home after we buried Clara wasn't just quiet, it was alive. It filled the chairs where she used to sit, seeped into the floorboards, and hung in the air like dust settling over every memory. For 70 years, my life had been filled with sound, the roar of saws in my first workshop, the laughter of a small boy learning to ride a bike, and the gentle hum of Clara's presence beside me. Now the quiet was deafening. The house, a sprawling colonial we had built together on a hill overlooking the city, no longer felt like a home. It felt like a museum of everything I had lost. I'd wander into the kitchen expecting to smell her coffee brewing, or step into the garden expecting to see her tending her roses. Every time the emptiness hit me like a physical blow. It was during one of those quiet, directionless afternoons about a week after the funeral that Mark and Vanessa showed up unannounced. The doorbell rang through the stillness like an alarm. When I opened the door, there they stood. Sympathy painted on their faces, impatience just beneath the surface. Mark couldn't meet my eyes. Vanessa, on the other hand, looked right past me, her gaze sweeping across the foyer like a real estate appraiser sizing up a property. I led them to the living room, Clara's room, the one she had decorated with such care. They sat on the pristine white sofa, looking entirely out of place. I offered coffee. They refused. The silence that followed wasn't mourning, and it was strategy. Vanessa broke it first. "James," she began, her tone syrupy with fake concern. "We've been so worried about you rattling around in this big house all alone." I said nothing. I just waited. "We've been thinking a lot about the future," she continued smoothly. "About stability. For the family. For Leo." The mention of our grandson was deliberate, a touch of emotional manipulation to dress her greed as family concern. I looked at my son. At 47, Mark still looked like a boy pretending to be a man, uncomfortable in his expensive suit, his eyes fixed on the carpet. He was the head of sales at Callahan Interiors, the company I built from nothing in a rented garage. But he didn't have my fire. He had Clara's gentleness. Without her strength, Vanessa pressed on. "The company needs a clear path forward. Mark has worked so hard, and after everything that's happened, a sense of security would be good for everyone." The implication was clear. I was done. My grief was inconvenient, a waiting period before they could take what they believed was theirs. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Let the silence do the talking. They mistook it for weakness. When they left, Vanessa patted my arm, a little gesture of triumph that made my skin crawl. Weeks passed. The sympathy cards stopped coming. The neighbors stopped dropping off casseroles. The world was moving on, and I was expected to do the same. Then one Tuesday morning, while paying bills in my study, the phone rang. It was Vanessa. Her tone was no longer sweet. It was business. "James, we need to talk," she said briskly. "Mark and Leo aren't handling this well. We're all exhausted. We need to get away for a while, to process our grief." I could hear the television in the background. It didn't sound like grief. "We found a lovely trip," she continued. "A month in Europe, Italy, France. It'll be healing, but we're a little tight on cash. I was hoping you could authorize a transfer from the company. A bonus for Mark, maybe $50,000. It would cover everything. $50,000 for a grief vacation." The audacity took my breath away. That was the moment something inside me, something buried under weeks of sorrow, finally woke up. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was anger. Cold, sharp, focused. "No," I said. There was a long pause. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice stronger this time. "The company's money is for the company. Not for vacations," she sputtered, outraged. "How dare you? After everything we've been through, this is about family." "Mark already earns a generous salary," I said evenly. "If he wants a vacation, he can pay for it himself." Her voice shook with fury. "You'll regret this, James." Then she hung up. I placed the phone down gently. My hand was steady. The fight had begun. That evening, just as the sun sank behind the hills, their car screeched into the driveway. They didn't bother ringing the bell this time. Vanessa stormed into my study, her eyes blazing. Mark followed behind her, shoulders slumped, silent as ever. "What was that on the phone today?" she demanded. "Who do you think you are?" I looked straight at Mark. "Is this what you want? To stand here and let your wife yell at me in my own home?" He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. Vanessa planted her hands on my desk. "Don't talk to him, talk to me. We've been patient, James. We've waited for years for you to retire. You've had your time. It's Mark's turn now." Her voice was sharp, venomous. "Clara was the only thing holding this family together," she sneered. "She always protected you, made excuses for your stubbornness. But she's gone. The buffer is gone. It's time to face reality. The company, the house, it all belongs to Mark. Your time is over." I looked at my son, at the boy who once believed the world began and ended with his parents. And in his silence I saw the truth. Clara's love had kept us together. Without her, the illusion was gone. What remained was greed, cold and pure. I nodded slowly. "I understand," I said quietly. "I understand completely." That night, sleep didn't come. I lay in our empty bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and sigh like an old man mourning with me. Clara's side was cold. By morning, I couldn't stay still. I needed to feel her again, to remember what love had once looked like before it was poisoned by inheritance and ambition. So I climbed into the attic. The air was still, smelling faintly of cedar and thyme. Sunlight streamed through the round window, catching the dust in golden beams. Everywhere I looked were echoes of a life built with love. Mark's old rocking horse, boxes of photo albums, Clara's sewing table. I ran my hand over the worn wood of the horse, remembering the sound of Mark's laughter as a boy. How could that little boy become the man downstairs and silent, spineless, complicit? I sank down beside Clara's old trunk and began leafing through her albums. Each page was a wound, our wedding, our early years, baby Mark. She glowed in every photo. For a while, that was enough, until I noticed a loose floorboard. It shifted beneath my hand. Curiosity stirred. I pried it up and found a small wooden box, dark cedar, tarnished latch, heavy. Something about it felt hidden. It wasn't just storage. It was secrecy. I hesitated. But then I remembered Vanessa's words, her cruel simplification of Clara's life. Soft, she had called her. No, Clara was more than that. She was layered, complex, and now evidently mysterious. I opened the box. Inside was the scent of dried flowers and old paper. On top lay a pressed gardenia, her favorite. Beneath it, a photograph of a young man with dark hair and a confident smile. It wasn't me, and under that, letters. Dozens of them tied with a faded blue ribbon. I untied the first bundle. The envelopes were yellowed, postmarked nearly 50 years ago, the year before I met Clara. "My dearest Clara," the first letter began. The handwriting was firm, elegant. The words were full of passion, dreams, books, laughter. It was signed, "Forever yours, Richard." A name I had never heard before. Until that moment. I read in silence for what felt like hours, my chest heavy with a strange mix of pain and pity. It wasn't just betrayal I felt, and it was mourning. For her, for the parts of her life I never knew. I almost stopped there, almost retied the ribbon and left her secrets to rest. But my hand reached deeper into the box and found another bundle, smaller, tied with a darker ribbon. The postmark made my blood run cold. 1978, 2 years after our wedding. With shaking hands, I unfolded the first letter. The ink was darker, pressed deep into the page. Of course it was from Richard. The tone was different now, older, heavier. He wrote of a life far away, of seeing a newspaper photo of Clara and me at a charity event. You were smiling, he wrote. I hope it was real. For your sake, I truly hope it was. My breath caught. He wrote of her pregnancy with Mark. And not as an outsider, but as a man on the edge of a truth that could destroy everything. We agreed it was for the best, he wrote. That a child deserves a complete home. A father who is present.
But Clara,
the thought of my child calling another man father is a pain I cannot describe. I set the letter down. The attic spun around me. In that moment, I finally understood why the lab report in my briefcase would change everything. It wasn't just paper. It was proof that Mark wasn't my son. The words blurred as I tried to read them again. My child, our child. A cold wave washed over me so suddenly it felt like I'd been plunged into ice water. It couldn't be true. It had to be a delusion. The ramblings of a heartbroken man who couldn't let go. But even as I tried to dismiss it, a terrible seed of doubt took root inside me, and its tendrils began wrapping around every memory I had of my son. I dropped the letter and stumbled backward, my mind scrambling for proof, for anything that could refute this. Mark never looked much like me. It had always been a family joke. Strangers, friends, even my own parents used to say it. He's all Clara. He has his mother's eyes, her smile. No one ever said he had my chin or my walk. I'd laughed it off, told myself that children are their own people. But now, that harmless observation felt like a damning piece of evidence. I remembered Clara's fierce protectiveness over Mark, how she'd hover, always shielding him. I'd once seen it as a mother's boundless love. But now, was it love or guilt? Was she protecting him from the world or her secret from me? A memory surfaced, sharp and vivid. Mark was 16, struggling in school, showing no interest in the woodworking business I'd hoped he'd inherit. One evening I'd been hard on him, frustrated by his lack of direction. Later that night, Clara found me in my study, her eyes red from crying. He can't help who he is, James, she'd pleaded softly. He's not you. You can't expect him to be, just love him for who he is. At the time I thought she meant his personalities, his ambitions, but now her words carried a darker, chilling echo. My hands trembled as I reached for the last letter. The envelope was thin, the paper heavier. Dated spring 1979, just a few months after Mark was born. It was a farewell. Richard wrote that he was leaving for the West Coast. He couldn't stay close. It was too painful. He promised never to contact her again, to set her free to live her life. And then came the final paragraph, the one that broke me. I will go to my grave loving you, Clara. I will always love you and our little boy, even if he carries another man's name. Our little boy, even if he carries another man's name. The sunlight from the attic window dimmed. The air grew heavy, thick, impossible to breathe. The attic wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a tomb for the life I thought I'd lived, for the woman I thought I knew, for the son I thought was mine. 47 years, a lifetime, all built on a beautifully crafted lie. Every birthday, every scraped knee, every proud moment at a school play. Every dollar I'd invested in his future. All of it. Tainted. The grief I'd carried for Clara twisted into something unrecognizable. Still grief, but now tangled with betrayal. Had she ever truly loved me? Or was I just the convenient, stable man who could give her child a name and a future? The anger I'd felt toward Vanessa and Mark the night before suddenly felt childish. Their greed was petty. This was something else entirely. A betrayal that redefined my existence. It wasn't about money or property anymore. It was about the truth. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it into my pocket, and walked out of the attic, leaving behind the ghost of my marriage. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity: my next phone call. Walking through the house felt like moving through a mausoleum. The photos on the walls, once comforting, now accused me in silence. Every smiling picture of Mark, every family portrait was a monument to a lie. But beneath the grief, something colder settled inside me. Not rage, not sorrow. Resolve. The foundation of my life had collapsed, and now I had to rebuild it from the rubble. Not on love, not on faith, but on truth, no matter how brutal it might be. I grabbed my car keys and left the house, driving toward the city. My hands followed the familiar route, but my mind was far away, replaying the words from that letter again and again. The city, the same one I'd watched grow, where I'd built my company and my life, looked alien now. Every landmark, every building felt meaningless. Just brick and steel, a backdrop to a life that might never have been real. David Chen's office stood in one of the old granite buildings downtown, solid, timeless, reliable. It was exactly what I needed. David had been my lawyer for nearly 40 years, but more than that, he was my friend. He'd been at our wedding. I was godfather to his eldest son. He had held Mark as a baby. The only person I could trust with this, his secretary, a kind woman who'd been there as long as I could remember, smiled gently as she led me in. She probably thought I was here about Clara's estate, if only it were that simple. David rose as I entered, concern etched in his face. His silver hair caught the afternoon light. "James," he said softly, stepping around the desk to grip my shoulder. "I'm so sorry. How are you holding up?" How was I holding up? I felt like a hollow building, still standing but ready to collapse with the slightest tremor. Without answering, I reached into my coat pocket and placed the bundle of letters on his desk. He looked at them, then at me. "What's this, James?" I took a deep breath, the first one that reached my lungs all day. "It's a complication," I said hoarsely. And then I told him everything. The attic, the box, the letters. I spoke like a witness giving testimony, flat, detached. I couldn't afford emotion. One crack and I'd shatter. When I reached the final letter, I read the last line aloud. He wrote, "I will always love you and our little boy, even if he carries another man's name." The silence that followed was suffocating. Only the soft ticking of the grandfather clock filled the room. David leaned back slowly, his eyes closed as he absorbed the blow. When he opened them again, the lawyer had replaced the friend. "What do you want to do, James?" he asked quietly. That question, so simple yet so final, crystallized everything inside me. "First," I said, my voice steady now, "I need to know for sure. Absolute proof. A DNA test," he nodded. "That's the logical first step. But we can't compel Mark without suspicion. It has to be discreet, through abandoned DNA." "Abandoned DNA?" I echoed. "Something he leaves behind in a coffee cup, a napkin, a hair from a comb. We can collect it without his knowledge, send it to a lab, establish a chain of custody. It'll hold up legally later." We spent the next half hour planning. Two old men huddled like generals at war. The pain was still there, but channeling it into strategy gave me something I hadn't felt in days: control. When the logistics were set, David leaned back. "All right," he said. "And the second step?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Then," I said coldly, "you're going to call Vanessa. Tell her I'm ready to discuss the future of the company and the estate. Schedule the inheritance meeting she's been demanding." I let the words hang. I want them to walk into that room feeling confident. I want them to believe they've already won. And then, we'll show them our hand. David studied me for a long moment, then gave a single solemn nod. "All right, James," he said. "Let them set their own trap. We'll be ready when they do." When I walked out of his office into the afternoon light, the world still felt unfamiliar, but I no longer felt lost in it. I had a purpose. The silent readjustment had begun. On the surface, my days returned to a quiet rhythm. Coffee for one, empty rooms, heavy silence. But beneath it, a war was being waged in secret. It began with a phone call. My hand was steady as I dialed Mark's number. Vanessa answered first, sharp, suspicious. "What is it, James?" I softened my tone, let weariness seep in. "Vanessa, I was hoping to speak with Mark." Muffled voices, then Mark came on, and hesitant. "Dad?" "Mark," I began gently, letting out a sigh. "I've been thinking about our last conversation. You were right. Your mother always smoothed things over. I haven't been fair to you or anyone. I'd like to change that." There was silence. I could almost hear his thoughts battling, suspicion against hope. "I was wondering," I continued, "if you and Leo might come over for dinner Friday night. Just the three of us. No lawyers, no pressure. I want to talk." To clear the air, Vanessa's muffled whisper came through. She was buying it. To her, this sounded like surrender. Mark finally spoke, cautious but relieved. "Yeah, Dad, that sounds good. We'll be there." I hung up the phone and stood there for a long moment in the quiet kitchen. The first move had been made. While I prepared the dinner, David was preparing the battlefield. He worked with the same quiet, relentless precision I had always admired. For hours we sat in his office, a war room of paper, precedent, and cold strategy. Together we dissected the legal anatomy of my entire life's work. The articles of incorporation for Callahan Interiors, the company bylaws I had written 4 decades ago, and the labyrinth of deeds and trusts Clara and I had built to safeguard our assets. David had a gift, the ability to see connections buried deep within the legal text. He found a clause in the corporate charter that Clara had insisted on years ago. It stated that a controlling interest in the company could only be transferred to a direct blood heir. At the time, it had seemed like sentimental fluff. Now it was a fortress wall. We reviewed Clara's will and my own, mirror images of each other. Everything passed to the surviving spouse and then to our son, Mark Callahan. The name stared back at me in black ink, stark and final. But David found the crack in the foundation. The wills rested on the legal definition of a son, and that definition, he explained, could be challenged. Stone by stone, he built my defense, crafting an unassailable fortress of law. When the storm hit, we would be ready. Meanwhile, Vanessa's impatience grew unbearable. She called David's office 3, sometimes 4 times a day. Her tone swung between sugar-coated charm and veiled hostility. "David, darling," she would purr to his secretary. "Just let James know we're ready whenever he is." It must be so hard for him at his age. David never reacted. He would jot down the message, smile faintly, and return to work. Her arrogance was blinding her, and that was our greatest advantage. Friday arrived. I set the dining room table, the one Clara loved, the one reserved for anniversaries and Christmas dinners. I took out her favorite china, polished the silver, and cooked roast chicken, Mark's favorite meal since childhood. It all felt surreal, like I was playing a part in someone else's life. A grieving father hosting his family for dinner. A man pretending everything was fine. They arrived at 7 sharp. Mark looked uneasy, while Leo, my grandson, strolled in with the entitled swagger of youth already lost in his phone. Dinner was an exercise in restraint. I kept my tone light, talking about old projects and the early days of the company, steering carefully around any mention of Clara. I spoke like a man still in control, but perhaps ready to hand over the reins. I could see Mark's shoulders slowly relax. He wanted to believe it. Leo, meanwhile, barely lifted his head. I poured Mark a glass of water. I watched him take it, his fingerprints clear against the glass, and take a long, casual sip. My heart felt like a stone in my chest. That glass and that simple object was the key to the truth I feared most, a necessary betrayal to answer a deeper one. After an hour of polite small talk, they made their excuses and left. I walked them to the door, shook Mark's hand, and said, "I think we can come to a very fair arrangement." He smiled, relieved, hopeful. He didn't see the cold determination behind my eyes. When their car's taillights disappeared, the performance ended. I returned to the dining room, my face void of emotion. The glass sat on the table, half full, silent and damning. Following David's exact instructions, I put on latex gloves, picked up the glass by its stem, and placed it into a sealed evidence bag. I labeled it with the date, time, and Mark's name. The act felt clinical, detached, like a scene from a crime drama. Yet this was no fiction. That ordinary glass now held the power to either destroy my past or reveal me as a fool. The next morning, I sent the package to the lab David had arranged, a reputable facility in another state. Then all I could do was wait. That week was the longest of my life. Time warped. Days stretched endlessly, each one thick with dread. I was trapped between 2 unbearable realities, one where my life had been a lie, and another where I had desecrated Clara's memory with baseless suspicion. I didn't know which was worse. Every phone ring jolted me like an electric shock. But it was never the lab. It was always a neighbor, a colleague, or a condolence call from someone who thought they knew my pain. I spent most of those days in my study, the place where Vanessa had first made her threat, where I had made the call that started this entire unraveling. I sat for hours, staring out the window at the old oak tree in the backyard, the one Clara and I had planted when Mark was a boy. Its leaves had begun to turn gold. The world outside was unchanged. Only mine was crumbling, Then, one Thursday afternoon, the phone rang, and this time I knew. The sound was sharper, colder. I let it ring 3 times before answering, as if delaying fate itself. "Hello," I said. My voice was calm. It was David. His tone was measured, professional, the voice of a man about to deliver news that would change a life. He said the report had arrived from the lab. I stared at the intricate wood grain of my desk, tracing its patterns with my eyes as my hand trembled on the receiver. I heard fragments: chain of custody verified, genetic markers, comparative analysis, and then the words that broke me. "James," David said softly, "the probability of paternity is 0%. 0. The word echoed in my mind like a verdict. There was no room left for hope, no ambiguity, no comfort in denial. The truth was cold and absolute. The trembling stopped. The roaring in my ears faded, replaced by silence, our vast echoing silence. It was true. All of it, 47 years. A lifetime built on borrowed love and another man's child. A strange calm descended on me. Not peace. No, peace requires something to be saved. This was stillness. The stillness that follows a storm that has leveled everything. The pain crystallized, no longer chaotic but sharp and solid, something I could carry. I had lost my wife, my son, and my past. But in losing everything, I had lost my fear too. My sorrow became armor. My betrayal became a weapon. I was no longer the victim of a 47-year lie. I was the executor of its truth. David's voice broke the silence, still soft, still concerned. He asked me what I wanted to do. I looked at the photograph on my mantle, Mark at 10, holding up a trout he'd caught, his face lit with pride. For a moment I felt a pang of sorrow for that boy, a boy who'd never known his real father, raised under the weight of a lie. But the feeling passed. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man complicit in greed and betrayal. I lifted the phone. My voice was steady, cold. "Proceed with the meeting, David." The day of the meeting, I drove to Callahan Interiors, my empire, my life's work. Walking through the workshop, I inhaled the familiar scent of oak and varnish. My longtime employees nodded respectfully, unaware of the war about to begin. This place, these people, were my true legacy. The boardroom was waiting. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the massive black walnut table I had designed myself, a monument to craftsmanship, to permanence. When they arrived, they came not as family but as conquerors. Vanessa entered first, draped in power and perfume, her heels clicking on the wood floor like gunshots. Her eyes swept the room as if it already belonged to her. Mark followed behind, shoulders slumped, eyes downcast. A man lost between guilt and confusion. And Leo. Leo didn't even bother to remove his headphones. He sank into a chair, scrolling through his phone, a bored prince awaiting his inheritance. I took my seat at the head of the table, my table, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Vanessa placed a thick, leather-bound binder on the table with a theatrical thud. She was the one who began the meeting. "James," she started, her voice a smooth, rehearsed purr. "Thank you for agreeing to this. I know this is a difficult time for all of us, Clara." Well, Clara would have wanted a smooth, seamless transition, for the sake of the family and the company. The moment she said Clara's name, it felt like desecration. My wife would have been horrified by this scene. But I let it pass. I wanted her to play her hand. My face remained calm and unreadable. She opened the binder. "I've taken the liberty," she continued, "of preparing a strategic transition plan, a forward-looking document to ensure the long-term stability and growth of Callahan Interiors." She slid a glossy, professionally printed booklet across the table toward me. I didn't touch it. I just looked at her, waiting. She cleared her throat and launched into her performance. It was a masterclass in corporate jargon, a cascade of empty words like synergy, leveraging assets, and generational transfer of leadership. She spoke of Mark's supposed vision for the company, a vision I knew extended no further than his next golf game. Then finally she got to the heart of the matter, the demands. "First," she said, pointing to a graph in her binder, "is the transfer of equity. To ensure Mark has the mandate he needs to lead effectively, we're proposing a transfer of 80% of the company's shares into his name." This will secure the Callahan legacy for the next generation, for Leo. She gestured vaguely toward our grandson, who was sitting nearby watching something on his phone. Oblivious. Of course, she continued, flipping a page. We've prepared a generous retirement package for you. James, a pension well above the industry standard for a retiring founder. It will allow you to live in complete comfort, without the day-to-day burdens of running a business at your age. My gaze flickered to Mark. He was staring at a water stain on a coaster, his face pale. He looked like a passenger in the vehicle of his wife's ambition, too cowardly to even meet the eyes of the man he was about to run over. For a brief second, I felt something close to pity. It passed quickly. Finally, Vanessa reached the last and most personal point. "And then there's the house," she said, her voice softening into a tone of false sympathy. "It's a magnificent property, a true family estate, but far too large for one person. It needs the life and energy of a family. We believe it's best for the house to be transferred to Mark and me. We've already looked into some lovely high-end retirement communities for you. Some of them even have golf courses." She closed the binder with a crisp snap. The sound echoed in the silent room. Her performance was complete. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, and the mask of professionalism slipped. What emerged beneath was the cold, hard gleam of greed. Her eyes were like chips of granite. Her smile was gone. "So let's be clear, James," she said, her voice low and sharp. "Clara isn't here to soften things anymore. She isn't here to protect you. This is the new reality. You will sign the papers. You will transfer the company to my son. You will hand over the keys to the house. You will accept the pension we've offered and learn to fend for yourself. It's the natural order of things. The old makes way for the new." She leaned back in her chair, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. The ultimatum had been delivered. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Mark still refused to look at me. Leo, sensing the tension in the room, finally looked up from his phone, mild curiosity flickering across his face. They all stared at me, waiting for the inevitable, waiting for the defeated old man to break, to plead, to surrender. I met each of their gazes in turn. I let the silence stretch until it began to suffocate them. Then I gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. My face was unreadable. I reached down beside my chair and lifted my own briefcase. It was much thinner than hers. I let her last words hang in the air, letting the full weight of her arrogance settle over the room. I looked at Vanessa's smug face, at Mark's cowardly silence, at Leo's detached indifference. They had presented their version of my future, a quiet, managed decline into irrelevance. They thought they'd read me my sentence, but then, slowly, a faint smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth or amusement. It was the smile of a chess player who sees the entire board clearly and realizes his opponent has just made a fatal, irreversible mistake. The smile unsettled Vanessa. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. "What's so funny?" she snapped, her tone losing some of its earlier confidence. I ignored the question and rested my hand on my briefcase, the same one that had been by my side for 30 years. "That was a very thorough presentation, Vanessa," I said evenly, my voice calm. A placid lake in the middle of her storm, very detailed. "But you seem to have overlooked a few things." I paused, letting the silence sharpen. Then I lifted my eyes to meet hers. "I also have a few documents that I think we need to consider before any decisions are made." And as if on cue, there came a firm, deliberate knock on the boardroom door. The sound wasn't loud, but in the tense quiet of the room it landed like a gunshot. Vanessa flinched. Mark jolted slightly in his seat. Even Leo looked up, startled. I was the only one who didn't react. I'd been expecting it. "Come in," I said, my voice calm and measured. The door opened and David Chen stepped inside. Impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, his silver hair neatly combed, he carried himself with quiet authority. His presence alone shifted the gravity in the room. This was no longer a family squabble. It was now something far more serious. David carried a worn leather briefcase, the kind that held not just documents, but consequences. Vanessa's eyes darted to him, then to the briefcase. Her smirk vanished, replaced by sharp confusion and a trace of fear. This wasn't part of her script. Mark's reaction was worse. I saw the flash of recognition, then panic. He knew exactly who David was. Not just my lawyer, but my friend. A man of integrity, intelligence, and unshakable resolve. David closed the door quietly behind him, the latch clicking like a gavel. He walked to the table with slow, steady steps, then gave me a respectful nod. "James," he said softly, his tone calm and deliberate. He took the seat beside me and placed his briefcase on the polished table, not with a thud, but with the weight of quiet certainty. The balance of power in the room shifted instantly. He opened the briefcase, and the soft click of the latches was the only sound. From it, he drew a single, slender folder. He placed it on the table, folded his hands atop it, and turned his gaze, not to me, but to Vanessa. "Mrs. Callahan," he began, his voice impeccably polite. "I've reviewed the proposal you've prepared. It is comprehensive." Vanessa, clearly thrown off balance but trying to regain composure, narrowed her eyes. "It's a standard generational transfer, David. Surely you've seen hundreds of them." "If you'll just advise James on the relevant signatures, we can conclude this." David offered a faint, almost amused smile. "A transfer of this magnitude," he said smoothly, "is never standard. This isn't just about assets or equity. It's about legacy, about heritage, about the continuation of a bloodline." At the mention of bloodline, something flickered across Vanessa's face. Confusion, impatience, unease. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. David opened the folder and slid out a single sheet of paper, the original corporate charter of Callahan Interiors. He turned it toward her and pushed it across the table. The real game at last had begun. David's finger stopped on a specific paragraph. He looked up at Vanessa and spoke evenly. "I'd like to draw your attention to Article 7, Section B," he said, a clause that Mrs. Clara Callahan herself insisted upon. It specifies that controlling interest in the company upon the founder's retirement or death must pass to a direct lineal descendant of the Callahan bloodline. He let the words hang for a moment before producing a second document, thicker and bound in blue. "And this," he continued, his tone steady, "is the Callahan Family Trust. It governs the disposition of all personal assets, including the family home." The language here, page 12, paragraph 4, is even more specific. It names the sole beneficiary after the passing of both founders as the lawfully begotten issue of James Callahan. He looked up, his expression calm but unyielding. "Lawfully begotten issue. Blood. These aren't sentimental terms, Mrs. Callahan. They're legally binding directives." Vanessa's face went pale as she stared at the documents. The first flicker of fear appeared in her eyes. She was beginning to understand this wasn't a negotiation. This was an execution. "This is ridiculous," she stammered, her voice cracking under the strain. "Mark is his son." "It's the same thing." David didn't flinch. "In the eyes of the law," he said quietly, "and in the precise language of these documents, it's the only thing that matters. And because of the significance of this clause, a final piece of due diligence was required before any transfer could be considered." He reached into the folder and pulled out one last item, a long, white sealed envelope from a certified laboratory. It looked sterile, official, and utterly terrifying. He held it up for everyone to see. "As executor of the estate," David said, "and to ensure full compliance with the explicit terms of the trust, I was legally obligated to confirm the beneficiary's standing." He took out a small letter opener, slit the envelope open, and the sound of tearing paper sliced through the silence like a blade. Inside was a single sheet of paper filled with technical data and legal certifications. David scanned it briefly, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up, first at Vanessa, then at Mark, who now looked like he might be sick. "This," David said, clearing his throat, "is the certified report from a genetic comparison analysis. The results are conclusive." He paused, letting the silence grow thick, the tension unbearable. And then, with the precision of a surgeon, he delivered the fatal blow. "The analysis confirms, with a certainty of 99.9999%, that Mark Callahan shares no genetic markers with James Callahan. The probability of paternity," he looked straight at Mark, "is 0%. For 5 long seconds, the world stopped. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. Then the room exploded into chaos. Vanessa shot to her feet, her chair screeching across the floor. "Lies!" she screamed, her face twisted in fury. "This is a trick. You forged it!" "He's a bitter old man trying to cheat his own son." But her hysteria was hollow because one look at Mark told the real story. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He just collapsed inward. Every trace of color drained from his face, leaving him a pale, lifeless shell. His mouth hung open slightly, a silent O of disbelief. He stared at me, but his eyes were empty, seeing nothing. It was as if his entire skeleton had dissolved, leaving only a hollow man in a chair. His name, his identity, his entire existence, obliterated in a single sentence. Even Leo was frozen, his phone forgotten in his hand, his jaw slack. The prince had just discovered he was a pauper. David waited calmly for Vanessa's shrieking to die out. When she finally ran out of breath, he spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "The document is legally certified," he said. "The chain of custody for the samples is unimpeachable. Therefore, the legal ramifications are simple. As Mr. Mark Callahan is not a direct lineal descendant, he has no legal claim under the corporate charter, and since he is not the lawfully begotten issue of James Callahan, he has no claim under the family trust." He paused, letting the words sink in. "He is not the heir. He has no right to the company, no right to the house, and no right to any assets within the trust." Then David turned his eyes to Vanessa, cold, unblinking, and final. "Your entire proposal," he said, "is predicated on a falsehood. It is null and void." The color drained from her face. Her rage collapsed into something far worse, understanding. She hadn't just lost a negotiation. She had lost everything. Her ambition, her arrogance, her greed, they had driven her family straight off a cliff. She had destroyed the very future she had been so desperate to secure. The look on her face was that of a gambler who had bet it all on one hand, only to watch the card turn to ash between her fingers. This story reminds us that the foundations of our lives must be built on truth, not illusion. A secret buried for nearly 50 years shattered a family and exposed the fragile lies that held it together. But the true lesson isn't just about betrayal. It's about strength. About finding the courage to face a devastating truth and rebuild on the solid ground of honesty. When the world you've known collapses under the weight of a lie, you have two choices: to be a victim of the past, or to become the architect of a new future, built upon truth. So I ask you, what would you have done in James's place? Is it better for a devastating truth to be revealed, or for some secrets to be taken to the grave? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that make you think.